Joining us today is Tiana Sharifi, an internationally recognized expert in the field of anti-sexual exploitation and human trafficking.
We tend to think predatory people lie about their identities online. And that's not to, they do, but most of the time they don't need to. They just need to focus on building a relationship as the person that they are. Unfortunately, like you wouldn't necessarily know until it's too late, which is why it's so important to spot those red flags early and then nip it in the bud and address it early on. Parents be so strict about their kids not having social media, not sharing information on their social media or on their gaming. Like they'll have these, they'll give all this information to their kid, but then on their own profiles and platforms, they'll share so much more information about their kid. And it's like, do you not recognize that, exploitative people, like they're also looking at parent profiles too, because you're giving away a lot of information about your kid.
Welcome to Well Informed, the podcast where we dive deep into important topics and bring you conversations with inspiring individuals who are making a difference. I'm your host, Colton Easton, and today we have a very special guest with us. Joining us today is Tiana Sharifi, an internationally recognized expert in the field of anti-sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Tiana is the founder of the Exploitation Education Institute, an organization dedicated to combating human trafficking and sexual exploitation through education, advocacy, and training. With over a decade of direct experience, Tiana has worked tirelessly to raise awareness and address the root cause of exploitation. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Tiana's work, the challenges and successes she's encountered, and what we all can do to help prevent exploitation and support victims. So it's an honor to have her here with us today, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I think, there's a lot of work that I don't think people realize that is being done here in BC, because we talked about it a little bit earlier before, is the work in BC that is being done, but the impact that it needs to have, not just through Canada, like globally as well. So, Tiana, your program, your initiative, your education is the Exploitation Education Institute, which is awesome. It's a beautiful website. So much good learning from that. Previously, though, it was a different name, right?
Yes.
It was Sexual Exploitation Education.
Yes.
So I just for folks who have never heard or are outside this world, what is Exploitation Education Institute? How did it come about?
Yeah.
And what's the story?
So, story, that's a loaded question. So I started C a few years ago, and after having been in the field for quite a few years, what I noticed was that people in the field who are well versed about sexual exploitation, we know what it is, we're aware of it, we think it's important, but the general public really didn't. And to me, the way that I saw sexual exploitation was that it's this issue that's a human issue that I think affects at least every other person, where you have somebody who's being taken advantage of or manipulated or coerced or pressured to engage in something that they're not comfortable with their body, in order to get some kind of a need met. So I started C with this goal of providing education on the topic, but doing it in an accessible way where the greater community feels like it's relevant. So instead of going in and saying, we're going to talk about sexual exploitation, I would try and use buzzwords like online safety and consent and healthy relationships and kind of touch upon the root causes of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. So I started C, and it was school-based programs. We would go to, tons of schools, educate tens of thousands of students, and also the teachers and the parents. And this last year, C is continuing as school programs, as it always has been. And instead, we've also now created Exploitation Education Institute, which is more of an evolution of the work that we're going to be doing past just the education in the schools. So with exploitation education, we are collaborating, creating partnerships with different agencies so that we can really get more of an impact in this space. We're also focusing more on the research piece of things, focusing on consulting, so really putting in more effort, helping other organizations with their programs as well, and trying to make them as accessible as we believe that ours are.
Because I think it's almost a similar pathway to what we had with like SST and now our International Center for Digital Threat Assessment, right? Because this work just expands way beyond schools now.
Yeah.
And there's so many people that need to be informed and involved and aware of what all these potential situations could be. So you talked about being in the field before. Like what was the field before, or what was the catalyst to drive to say, let's start this company? Because that's a huge undertaking to have.
Yeah. So the first, my educational background is counseling and psychology, but the first work that I got was really actually in the field giving presentations specifically on human trafficking across the province of BC. And from that, I really gained so much knowledge about what's happening in all of the communities, stories that we don't see or hear about in the news, really noticing just how prevalent it is. And after doing some education workshops on human trafficking, I went to actually work frontline with victims of human trafficking and youth who were at risk of being sexually exploited. But then ultimately I came back to work in prevention. And what really sparked me starting to see is that there was a moment in my career where there were no places for me to continue my work in preventing sexual exploitation. Right. And so the only way to stay in the field was to create my own agency and to go under my own name. And so that's really, and I wasn't thinking about how big it was going to be or all the components involved. Right. I just thought, I'm going to be me and I'm going to go out and I'm going to continue giving education. And of course that changed very quickly and became this big thing. And so that's how it got started.
Well, and the way that you present information, I think is, as you said, it's very graspable, like to somebody who's outside this this world. And one of the things I really appreciate about your presentations is exactly what you said, is that it is a human problem. It's a human element to this, and the digital side is the tool in which they are exploiting these things.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite slides, one of my favorite topics that you presented on is like, what does a positive, healthy relationship in person look like? And then you show the slide of, okay, what does that digital relationship look like? And hey, guess what? They are the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's awesome to see. So I can imagine, the moving into the institute side of things has become so much more. Because even previously when I was talking to you, even like a year ago back, you were writing a whole bunch of other like programs and initiatives outside. So
yes,
you keep them busy.
It's been a lot. I think that it's really, driving me right now. And I know that you all see it as well, is we have to shift the way that we talk about this issue so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming, especially with the digital space. I think that's one of the biggest things, like in terms of accessibility and why I prioritize it, is I totally understand that if there's a topic that sounds so doom and gloom and out of your reach and grasp, and you're like, well, can't do anything about it, just cross your fingers and hope that it works out. So I think that we're, especially with the digital space, and really we need to reach everybody. It's so important to make things as accessible as possible and relatable as possible.
Yeah, it's what I say in like school safety as well, is that, school safety and the security is not just the staff members' responsibility. It's not just the students' responsibility. It's not just the parents' responsibility. Yeah. It is everybody's. And we need to make sure we have the tools to inform or, bring this information to those who are outside this world. And, one of the things that Carol and I were talking about previously in the last episode was the accessibility for parents. Those who are seeing and involved in the content, watching it, those aren't always the parents who need to see it the most. Yeah. So we were looking at like, oh man, what if we did like a Saturday morning session, right? Because usually it's a after school, like dinner time, we got to get kids to practice and do all these things, like exploring different ways of how we can reach out to people. So I think mediums like this, where people can access it at any time, they see interesting topics and they digest it at their own leisure, basically.
Absolutely. And I think, like, again, and what you guys are doing with this podcast really exemplifies that, is introducing it as like, you're not here to learn as an expert on like a topic that you just don't understand or is like really far-fetched. It's like, no, we're having a conversation. My TikTok, actually, I don't know if you know this, my personal TikTok went
You have a lot of followers.
It went so viral for no reason.
You know how to make that algorithm work.
My sister was pissed because she's an influencer.
Oh, really?
And I just posted, I went on TikTok one day. I had just given birth to my daughter. I was like on mat leave and bored. And I was like, I'll download this random app that I know nothing about. And I posted a video. And then within a few hours, my sister messaged me and was like, what is going on? And I was like, I don't know what I did. But my personal TikTok, it went viral. And what's interesting is I have a business TikTok where I was talking about this issue, barely got any views.
Yep.
But then here I am as a mother trying to talk casually and having a conversation with other mothers or other parents. And all of a sudden there's so much interest in it. And I think that's how we have to approach.
And I totally agree. I think a lot, especially on TikTok, seeing marketing on TikTok is wild. Wild.
You don't even know it's happening to you.
Right. Exactly. And like you start to pick up on these things because like we're going to be traveling overseas at the end of September. And now my whole For You page is like curated to those searches. Like, here's the best things you need to do over here.
Yes.
But I always make sure at the very end, like I double check that they say, oh, just check my affiliate link to purchase these services. I'm like, I'm being influenced.
Yeah, you got me.
It's hard. And then, how influencer marketing is really interesting because I'll always try to search like company profiles on TikTok to see like how are they leveraging TikTok.
Oh, yeah, that's smart.
Because you see companies who are doing it right and companies who are not, hitting the mark.
Yeah.
And why it's interesting to me is because how products are marketed on TikTok is very different from mainstream media and how it is. And that's the same with podcasts as well. It's that you're using it as a avenue you're not selling anything you're doing on TikTok. You're just promoting or you're just making your product aware of what you do or starting a conversation. So you see TikToks or companies that make TikToks about selling their services and advertising through TikTok, and those get no place. But then you get Duolingo, right?
Yeah.
And you have this guy in a bird costume just beating up their employees, and people are like, yes, that's funny. I want that.
So true. It's the human experience at the end of the day, right? Like, especially in this digital space, or digital technology-driven world, I think there's such a desire for human connection, like human conversation. And I think that's actually really beneficial because it's easy to have those.
I absolutely agree. And I think on the flip side, that also makes it easier for those who are those bad actors to reach out, because what you said at the beginning is that there is an emotional need that a victim has or is not getting, and time again we find that these bad actors, they do the research on their victim. They find the mutual friends, they see what's missing, and they slide in and they provide that need. And I'm curious, just from your experience, for a young person who is potentially getting on that pathway to being exploited, from your experience, what do you see the pathway look like? What are some of the big risks or the red flags that parents need to know about? And even youth who are watching this, or anybody who's listening or watching this, what are some of the big things they need to know?
Yeah, so we give a code because we think it's just easier if you're specific and detailed and give something memorable. It's just easier. We have a code, so the way that you know that something is suspicious online is with our code SUS. Easy to remember. And so we break it down by, if you're in any kind of a conversation with someone online that is giving you, that person is promising or giving you stuff. So that's the first S, is stuff. Okay. So the way that we see it right now is, you have somebody who is engaging in sugar dating digitally. So somebody reaches out, so let's say through Instagram on a, direct message, and says, hey, I'd love to give you $500. Let's just have like romantic conversations, or, I'll pay for your Amazon wish list items. So anybody that's offering any kind of stuff, even through video games, gaming tokens, things like that. And then you have, and this is a bigger red flag, is somebody who has a little bit of an age difference. So that's U is for unusual age difference. So I know that we tend to think predatory people lie about their identities online. And that's not they do. But most of the time, they don't need to. They just need to focus on building a relationship as the person that they are. Right. So if you've connected with somebody, they're a few years older than you, they're offering you stuff, whether it's gaming tokens or Amazon wishlist items or sending you an iPhone or whatever it is. And then you have this like slow isolation almost and very quick play into sexual activity and behavior. And this is something I think it's so important for everybody, even adults, to know, is that, and this is actually speaks to that diagram that we have of what's normal in person and what's normal online, right? If you meet somebody, you don't go, hey, how's it going? Show me your butt. Or like I don't know if I can say that on this podcast. You don't just like immediately say hi to somebody and then ask them for some kind of sexual favor. It doesn't work that way. That's not normal human interaction. Same with online. If you've connected with somebody online, you can have an immediate spark in person, but that's not going to be the same digitally. So if somebody's immediately getting into sexual conversation with you and they're, asking you about how far you've gone, how many relationships you've had, what are you wearing, send me a photo, all within like a 24-hour period, really. That's also a red flag. And then the last piece that we always see is that there is a switch to a different platform. So that's the last S, is switch to platform. Most oftentimes that is Instagram, it is Snapchat. It can also be even like a Google Hangout or something like that. So really what happens is that you've connected with somebody online. They've clearly identified what your need is. So if it is a luxurious lifestyle or to be an influencer, or if it's love, or if it's acceptance, or if it's fame, they've identified that, they're offering to meet that need. And then you'll start to see those red flags of switching platforms and offering you things and
The switch is, I think, a huge thing that I don't know a lot of people really understand, that is a tactic done on purpose. And whether it's, hey, I like your photos on Instagram. Like, I've seen what your posts. Oh, I know we have mutual friends. Let's move this to another conversation. Add me on Snapchat or, the other apps like Signal, Telegram, all those other places. Kik. Ugh. Yeah. Terrible app. And that is a tactic done on purpose. Absolutely. And I think, this realm of where we're discussing these victims and these perpetrators, you said that some of them don't even need to create a fake persona and they don't need to pretend to be a 16-year-old boy or girl and reach out. And I think those are because those are two very different routes usually, talking with Carol, a lot of the times, obviously we go down the sextortion route, right? And I think the exploitation and human trafficking route, they come from very similar foundations, but I think there's some drastic differences between the two that I think are important to kind of talk about and establish.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we did, we were involved in research a few years back, and this concept came up because our goal was to train these web crawlers to go and detect predators online. And human traffickers online. That was our goal. And then we quickly realized the only way that you really know if the person that's grooming is a sexual predator or a sextorter or a human trafficker is at the end of it, what they end up doing. Like that end goal. The process to get there is actually very similar. But the difference so we have the sexual predator, their intention is just sexual activity, sexual material. It's very self-focused. The trafficker, wants that sexual material, but the purpose of it is they're going to profit off of it in some way. And sextortion really is the same thing. When sextortion is being done, digital blackmail is being done specifically with the intention of getting money, you're coercing another person sexually to get money out of them. That's human trafficking. So the way that you really know, again, is you wait until at the very end, you can determine whether or not that person's trafficking because, they're looking for a profit, but at that point it's too late. But I think that what we tend to see traffickers do more online is the sugar daddy scheme. So, saying that they'll pay you money if you're engaged in sexual conversations or a photo. The person that's looking to recruit you onto a sugar dating website or onto OnlyFans or something like that. And then you have the love bomber, the one who wants to create a relationship with you and lure you that way. But unfortunately, you wouldn't necessarily know until it's too late, which is why it's so important to spot those red flags early and then nip it in the bud and address it early on. Yeah,
because some of our other, colleagues and presenters also are involved in the gang world. And, the pathway that you're describing is very, very similar to somebody who is getting on the pathway to negative peer groups or youth gangs, and also for that human trafficking part as well. Using that allure of, oh, here's all the things you could have or what I can give you because I am giving it to you. But that's almost to them in their mind as the deposit, I guess, for what they could potentially have, which is a horrible way of looking at it, but it's an unfortunate reality of, looking at, and what I was saying earlier is that when somebody randomly messages me on social media platforms, even if there's no ill intention or whatever it could be, I always get like, why are you reaching out to me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I feel like this definitely world and this work has definitely made us and caused a shift in how we look at social media, how we use it personally as well. And obviously, just as you said, being a new recent mother, like that has probably had a huge impact on how conversations about technology get brought up, and knowing all those things there.
Yeah. And some of those things, like for me, what's important for me to prioritize with my daughter, and I think that every parent should do this, is just having those constant conversations where you're really encouraging critical thinking, because I don't even want to know what it's going to be like when my daughter's a teenager. But right now you have this like just huge push of influence culture. And I think that's one of the most at risk, factors that creates vulnerability in so many different ways. And having conversations, like if my daughter was a teenager, we would have conversations about influence culture and like really like breaking down, is it really what you see, right? Or is somebody trying to sell themselves as a product, and you're getting, fed this like glamorized version of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Because with influence culture, you have this like commodifying of people, and anybody, a random Joe Schmo, can become a celebrity. Yeah. So then when somebody does reach out and they don't know you, well, it's like, well, why, maybe they're interested in me and I could be an influencer. And,
And one of the other things as well that they do is that they'll pretend to be from some sort of agency, right?
Yes. And oftentimes it's we've gotten that so many times actually, in where schools reached out to us and they said, these two students, they got approached at a mall by somebody that had a business card. In person, had a business card. And then you see that now with the digital space too, where kids are getting approached on Instagram or on TikTok. And then again, like they see a normal person, right, all of a sudden get this like claim to fame. And so it's very easy to be lured into this idea of, if something's too good to be true, it probably is. However, sometimes we're seeing with influence culture that it can be too good to be true, because that's what that's the lie kind of that they're being fed.
Absolutely. And like that type of influence culture, there's so many specific conversations you need to have with boys and with girls, like, the expression, the keeping up with the Joneses, right? Yes. You knew that they were your next door neighbor. They got the car, but you saw all the other intricacies, the ups and downs of the relationship. Yeah. But now with the digital neighbors, you're seeing everything highlighted. There's some sort of like push or promotional material for those things, like the report from 2021 about the internal report about Instagram pushing eating disorder related content.
Yes.
And then not really a lot of follow-up happening from that, and it's like,
yes.
Oh my gosh.
That's true.
And what that pushes, and then you see it on the male side as well about the, you get, I hate to name names, but it's the Andrew Tate community.
I knew you were going to say that.
I know. It's the one that jumps to mind. It's the one, but
it's a good one though.
I was having a conversation with David earlier, and especially for our young men, because again, that's primarily who these exploiters are. There are women who are recruited to do this as well, but at the end of the day, it's these men who have been, influenced from these other individuals or these creators. And one of the things I find, especially in these, I don't know how even to describe it, the alpha male communities or the sigma males or whatever you want to call it, is that those guys are meeting a need that these youth aren't having, because things like male mental health and men's mental health is still a huge thing, still a thing that we're needing to break a lot of the cones of silence for, and there's been lots of leaps and bounds, but there's still a lot of work to do. So what I find that these content creators are doing, they're actually meeting these young, impressionable males where they're at, saying like, your life does suck. Yeah. You have nothing going for you, but I have the tools to give for those things.
Totally. And I think a large part of that too is identity. Because I think especially like young boys right now too, like we're dismantling we call toxic masculinity or like patriarchy or whatever you want to call it. We're dismantling that, but then it's leaving these young boys going, well, like, who am I?
What do I do now?
And like, what does it mean to be a man? Yeah. And there's so much information out there, and like, where do you look and where do you go? And because identity is so big, right? That like self-validation and like self-actualization is so huge. And I think that's what the internet provides, because exploitation is all about needs. You're getting your needs met through an unhealthy, exploitative form. And, you know, with the internet, I think what it's done is that it's really, it can address somebody's higher level needs. And so the vulnerability, you don't have this idea of like a vulnerable population or a vulnerable group anymore. Because with the internet, like anybody can be vulnerable because we all have those higher needs. And that's also what's being targeted. But, you know, going back to your point of like these young men and people like Andrew Tate, like that's where I think it's so important that we focus on the root causes to exploitation. And really to anything. And so like we really focus on consent. Like that's one of the programs that we just released for grade 6 all the way to grade 12 is consent and healthy boundaries. And then what does that look like in person? What does it look like online? Why is it important? Why should you care? And if we start to implement those educational pieces, then you don't, you know, if you respect somebody's consent and boundaries and you see them as a human being, you're less likely to want to commodify them or exploit them or, you know, take advantage of them.
Yeah. Carol was saying earlier that there are kids suing and going after their parents for
sharenting.
Yeah. That have shared all the intimate details of their, you know, lives when they were a lot younger, going over to that now. And that digital consent piece is huge. And, you know, you said this is a program that starts at grade 6.
But actually we're going to be starting at grade 3 going in the future. But
and that's what I mean is that we're having to have these conversations earlier and earlier. Yeah. I recently joined a parent group just because I want to see. And it's parenting in a tech world. Carol told me about it.
I follow it. I don't know if you go as crazy as I do reading some of those posts because there's so much that you want to say to every person that's asking a question.
And there's also so many things that you want to tell the commenters to be like, why is that the advice you're giving?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh.
And it goes to back like, where are they getting their advice? And again, people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. And I think also it's funny because sometimes it just takes somebody putting things into perspective because you'll have parents be so strict about their kids not having social media, not sharing information on their social media or on their gaming. Like they'll have these, you know, they'll give all this information to their kid, but then on their own profiles and platforms, they'll share so much more information about their kid. And it's like, do you not recognize that, you know, exploitative people, like they're also looking at parent profiles too, because you're giving away a lot of information about your kid. There's, I mean, through TikTok, I see a lot of these mom influencers, and there are quite a number of them that, and it just disturbs me so much that they highlight their kids and then they highlight, well, this is my kid's full name, this is their birthday, and then it gets worse. This is their hobby, this is the cheer squad that they're on. These are the things that they like, that they don't like. And it's like, you know, you have this full picture of who this child is. And of course, like that same parent won't allow their kid to share anything themselves. But then it's like, well, you've just put them.
Yeah. And you're only as strong as your weakest link. And,
yeah.
Right. And that's why, that was really interesting for when she told me that. I was like, that kind of makes sense. Cause now digital consent is something that, we in our sessions, we say, look, next time you take a photo of your kid, ask.
Yeah.
Can I post this?
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It's that conversation starting, but earlier and earlier, these conversations are having to happen.
Yeah. And we're having to reframe the way that we think about things too, right? Because like, I think in our generation and older, that concept wasn't there. So it's all of us have to shift how we're thinking.
Yeah. One of the things that jumped to mind during this, talking about your, past work in the field, and again, watching some of your sessions, the undercover side of things, a little bit of the, like actually getting screenshots from these groomers and these parts of these conversations. I personally, I'm curious to know, like, how did that go about? Like how easy was it? How difficult was it to find these individuals? What was some of the work that went in there?
To answer your question, so easy. And so just to explain to the listeners, a part of this research project that we did, in order to train a web crawler or even define what a predatory comment or predatory, post or predatory picture was, we had to literally like define that in very black and white terms. So part of my role was creating different fake profiles on different social media platforms, posing as teenagers. It was absurdly easy because I thought that I would have to go out of my way having these, profiles where I wasn't hashtagging anything. I wasn't, tagging any photos or anything. I just created these profiles. And I thought I would have to go out of my way to try and like find predatory people, which obviously goes against the natural part of the research, which is we didn't end up doing this route anyway, because we're like, it doesn't work. But what was really alarming was I had so many messages just flowing into my inbox from people and like local people. We're not talking about people from, internationally. I know the internet has no borders, but like we're talking about local people that were in the city next door. And it was just really alarming because, the usernames would very clearly identify this person was a particular age or underage.
Right.
And the number of people that just voluntarily reached out to have a conversation, and it within a day, it would just go so wrong so fast. And it was really easy to, then screenshot those conversations, and really easy to see in black and white terms what is predatory. And what's been really helpful is that we take those conversations, because if you're a teen or you're a child, you might not notice that those conversations are toxic or unhealthy, right? It might seem like a very natural conversation for you until somebody comes in and identifies exactly what was really alarming about that. So we actually took screenshots of these conversations and we implement them into our presentations, where after we give the kids our sus code, we have them, really like break down these conversation screenshots. And it's so interesting to see the number of kids that come up after the presentations to say, I'm blocking X, Y, and Z because I've noticed all these red flags in my conversation, but they didn't notice it before.
Right. Oh, man.
Yeah. But I mean, to answer your question, so easy to post using deep fakes, make myself look younger. I didn't use any other minor photos because that's unethical in my line of work. But yeah, these people like completely open profiles. There was no lying about their age or where they work or who they were. Just absolutely no shame whatsoever.
The audacity, I guess. Yeah. That's wild. And, just hearing some other previous conversations, it seems that there is a level of arrogance of, I'm here. And that's scary.
Very much. Very much. And actually, one of the... wasn't funny, but it was kind of funny. One person in particular was just so disturbing, and I broke character, and I told them, like, you are a part of research where we're trying to find predators, and like, congratulations, you fit the mark. And then his response to that, everybody else would block most of the times and just hope that you didn't get their information. This person was like, oh, you broke my heart, I can't believe you're not real.
Wow.
And just it's wild. But all of those instances, these predatory people were forming a relationship. They were being themselves and forming a relationship. And then came the needs, right? Like the love bombing, which was actually one of the main tactics and intentions.
Interesting. One of the things we look for when we look at publicly available content for youth who might be on the pathway to whatever it could be, one of the things we look at is the student potentially at risk of sextortion.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things that you talk about, they're publicly available, right? We look at who's following them.
Yeah.
We can tell that these accounts aren't other high school students. We can tell that these are other individuals from various parts of the world. And we can check the comments. They're publicly available. Those comments are being left there. We look at the student's bio. Guess what's there? It's an Amazon wish list.
Yes.
And the contents of that wish list, it's like, and those are the things that we look at. Because, again, through publicly available content, we can't necessarily confirm, but there is somebody who kind of meets that threshold of here's are some of the concerns that we've seen based on past experiences that does make somebody more susceptible to receive those messages and potentially go down that pathway. And these are all things that conversations and rules and things that need to start earlier and earlier. Because a lot of the times, again, just from, going back to the parent groups, it's like I gave my 9-year-old an iPhone for Christmas and now they're messaging somebody on Snapchat, and I don't know who they are, what they're doing, and it's like, now I need the help. After a situation has happened, now I want to find the information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like the conversation does need to be had of like, it's not just what's your online portrait or footprint, digital footprint, whatever people use. It's really like conveying this sense of whatever platform you're on, everything that you say and do, all of your behaviors, they inform these platforms that then create this algorithm that's like tailored for you. And in the same way, all the behaviors and everything that you do online, it also provides this like almost like an algorithm for predatory people.
Right.
And it gives them this very full-on picture of exactly what do they need to come after you, or are you vulnerable? Are you an easy target? And recognizing that actually specific things that you do will convey that kind of information, whether you think that you are or not. That's what.
Yeah, it's taking advantage of those cries for help, and it's posting about, again, I'm feeling this way because this thing happened, and it's natural to share our experiences and what we're dealing with and struggling with. I mean, not for me, but for our youth, from what we find, that's how we are able to identify these things. And again, what's made public, especially on places like TikTok, as you know, it doesn't make sense to have a private account on TikTok.
Yeah.
Because you can't go viral. Your video can't show up on other people's For You pages. So
true.
And just going back to how, you post one video, then all of a sudden, it goes
randomly,
viral from there, and not your business account, but the personal one. So how many followers do you have?
I think it's 150,000.
Nice. Crazy.
So weird.
Yeah.
So weird.
It really is strange. It's such a different medium. Like, I try to interact and post.
Yeah.
Just like, not to do with work or anything, but like, personal, just got married, got some photos back, and like we had these funny glasses, and I was putting together a post to put online about it, and I was like, this took me 20 minutes to make. I don't want to do this. This was not fun to do. But again, content creators, influencers, like that's their whole thing. And that is also the increased screen time usage as well. Yeah, there's a lot that covers it. And I think the training or the education, right? So it's students that you had with C, and then kind of expanding with the Exploitation Education Institute. Like, who else are you reaching out to with that, or who else is part of that?
Yeah, so we just recently, and we're just putting the finishing touches in place, but we started collaboration partnership with Ally Global Foundation. And we created this thing called the Prevention Project. So we're at the finishing touches now. It is released and it's public. We're just actually creating these facilitator manuals. But we decided to come together and we looked at what's really missing in the space. And so we created this learning space that's really youth focused, and where we almost provide like these animated videos and like peer safety videos and cartoons and all these things on all the different topics that we would need to talk to kids about from age grade 3 all the way to grade 12, including things like trafficking and OnlyFans and sugar dating and consent for 8-year-olds. So we create this space, and it's there's over 100 pieces of educational content. It's all free to access. You can download it for free. And what we created was we looked at people learn through different methods, right? Especially you have kids that are they're homeschooled, or they have some kind of a learning disability of some sort. So we created these materials so that any parent who wants to have this conversation and doesn't even know where to start can put their kids on this platform, and then their kid can just engage in this really interactive and fun learning process where we're doing the work for them. And right now we're creating facilitator manuals so that the teachers in classrooms can also implement them.
Huge. And that's a huge, I think, aspect and element for that is not just having these one-off presentations come in and that's it. And we always do our best to try to keep that presentation, yearly, come back, but integrating it into the curriculum, I think is huge, especially for that digital literacy.
Definitely.
We're doing a kind of a pilot project with a school district and helping out with how can we use that and part of the everyday. So that way, peer-to-peer learning, I feel is such a huge element, or listening to the teachers or somebody that's trustworthy as well. And I think that's a huge element. But yeah, that's the prevention project is what it's called.
The prevention project.ca.
But
yeah, and it was really neat because it was survivor informed. We also had like youth groups that were kind of like groups that we would sample the content to. And what was really cool is that like there's so much intention that went behind all of it. Mm-hmm. So even something like sexting, like intimate image sharing, like we really scripted, like, and don't tell the kids this, but we really scripted the kinds of questions that were asked in a gamified way. And then the answers back that really spoke to the psychology behind why kids would engage in these kind of behaviors. Right. And I think it is effective to see their peers give those responses back and show strength and, respect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. To be able to call out certain things. Because I think once things get demystified, that brings out the understanding, okay, I know what this is. I see what it is.
Yes.
And then we can kind of talk about it and go from there.
Yeah.
But outside of this, like you've had consulting roles with the United Nations, Canadian Parliament, and I'm curious because we're talking about what we can do in the school level and some of the other places, but on kind of the more macro scale. What are some of those critical issues that have been highlighted that is being worked on or needs a little bit more work?
Yeah, so I really try and advocate, especially with regards to legislation. So one of the things that I really focus on, regardless of whatever topic I'm branching into, it could be human trafficking, it could be child exploitation, it could be child sexual abuse materials. One of the things that I really focus on advocating about is that we have to prioritize the safety of kids first. That's something that I've seen. There's pushback sometimes on legislation that's being created to keep kids safe. And then there's pushback about, well, that actually infringes on the rights of adults. So for example, one of those things is that we're Canada's like trying to put legislation in place that really creates more of an onus on pornography platforms to prove that somebody, that whoever's being posted on there is not a minor. Because right now, the onus is on the police to prove it. So you'd have to have a minor, or you'd have to have somebody come forward and say, hey, there's a minor on here to the police. Then the police would have to gather the evidence to prove that that is the case. The onus becomes on them, investigation, money, all of that stuff. Whereas instead, we could actually put the onus on the platform itself that every person that uploads content has to have like an ID for verification that they're an adult. And some of the problems that I see is that you have groups that are claiming, well, that makes things more difficult for those who want to upload content onto pornography platforms or for the viewers. And it's like, well, my view is that like the kids' safety, it has to come first. So even when, I met with the member of the UN, that was something that I was trying to push because he was here to talk about human trafficking. And what I was really trying to push is like, this stuff happens in the same industry as sex work. That's what and the research project that I helped with out of Simon Fraser University, like we proved this, that child exploitation, human trafficking, it does happen in the same field. It's the same consumers. And so we have to be mindful about keeping the kids safe first and foremost. So that's one of the things that I really try and advocate for.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I've seen in the U.S. now, like some of the pornographic websites are now implementing like an ID check to use the website.
Yeah.
Which again, for the person who's viewing it, proving that they're over the age of 18. But I don't know if it covers to actually upload and produce content there to verify ages.
Yeah, I don't know I think it's more of the user has to be 18, but it should be both ways. And obviously then there's concerns about like anonymity, but like my especially with my field and being a mother, like my priority always is child safety first.
Yeah, of course. What are some of I know you probably get this question a lot, and I know it comes up and I see it a lot, but in terms of like red flag apps to be aware of, because I know you know the answer to this question, and but because that's something that I get in my personal life a lot. Like, what are the apps that they shouldn't download or should download, and what's the right age. But I'll talk about the app specifically.
Colton, that's such a hard question because there's so many different ways that we can go about that. I mean, red flag apps to me would be, we were just talking about this, like vault apps, any kind of vault app. And I think that it's important as parents to know about what these apps look like.
Yes.
Honestly, like I wouldn't say red flag necessarily, because I think at the end of the day, we have to teach our kids at an appropriate age how to have access to these platforms like Instagram and TikTok sometimes too. I think TikTok actually does a really great job with censoring their content and being proactive. But Instagram, unfortunately, is one of the main platforms like we constantly find exploitation happening on with kids. It's a red flag app, but I wouldn't necessarily say don't let your teenager download it.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So that's the Snapchat for sure, red flag.
Yeah.
Red flag app. I think that one I would say red flag app. Yeah, but even things like Twitch, for example, but again, it's difficult because like Discord, there's so much exploitation happening on Discord, but I wouldn't call it a red flag. The problem isn't the app. The problem is who's on there.
Yeah.
And how is it being used? And so again, like even Roblox, super innocent kid game, lots of red flag behavior. So I wouldn't, maybe this isn't the right answer for a lot of people and people would disagree. But I would argue that it's not the app itself, but it's who's on it, except for, this is an app.
Yeah.
Except for OnlyFans.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, my mind goes to the youth-centered, like, friend apps.
Dating apps.
Apps.
Yeah, like Peekaboo. Peekaboo, I think, actually got shut down.
Yeah.
I think.
And then there's Wiz.
Yes, that's true.
There's
You're right.
Herp. There's so many, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're right.
Those ones scare me.
Yeah. That's a definite no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting because there is age verification now in Wiz, I believe.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, in our line of work, we have to know how the apps work and how they're, how they perform so we can talk about it. So I tried to download it.
Yeah, me too.
Used a fake email.
Yeah.
Said I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
But I have to upload a photo of myself.
Not upload. I think it has to take it.
Take
takes
an actual
it on the
photo.
spot.
Yeah, an actual selfie.
Did you pass it at 16?
Not with a beard. Not going to work. So I tried to get around that with like the computer, like of a face of a, and then use that. Yeah. And it actually didn't work.
Yes.
So I don't know what technology they're using, but how, I guess they're using some sort of AI into that to verify, but it kicked me out and it blocked me. And I couldn't use it. Right? And I'm like, okay, that's good news. I don't know how to get into this app now to actually figure it out, but that's good news. So
funny.
I am curious to know like what technology they are actually using to do that, because I've seen other YouTube videos of other individuals that like do the same thing just to show like here's what they can get, but they get through somehow. So I don't know if it's that they look younger or that they, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
It's so interesting that we had the same experience. I was a little offended.
Yeah, right.
Like, I could.
Yeah.
Like I'm younger. No, it's interesting because I remember like everybody was, all these anti-exploitation websites were like, or organizations were really advocating against like Wiz. This is such a bad platform. And I was thinking, well, Peekaboo had come out at the same time. Shut down now, thank goodness. But with that one, there was nothing. It was free for all. I got on there and there were so many kids and just like the most promiscuous photos like on that platform. It's unfortunate we don't know what's going on with, but I think what actually somebody that I know does have that app, but even those platforms, like again, it's this anything that really promotes this idea of you can find friends online, and encouraging that, I think can be so harmful, especially if you haven't talked to your kid about what a friendship is, what that looks like. And again, like what's a normal way in person and online to make a friend? How do you know your online friend is real and all those pieces?
Absolutely. Any app that promotes friendship, and especially because it's aimed at teens, it's just, it doesn't seem.
And you have to think like, what's the intention behind it?
Yeah.
Too. That's my.
I always get super interested about the creators of these apps, so I'll go on deep dives and be like, who is this guy? What's his LinkedIn? What's his history like? Right. All that stuff is really interesting to me to see. Like, who are these people who are advertising these apps? What's the reason behind creating it? Because there's no way you can create an app like this and not know the potential risks.
Oh yes.
but then also do nothing to, or, unless somebody brings it up, then you're like, okay, now we're putting safeguards in place. Now we're doing this.
Yeah.
And that's especially like with places like Snapchat as well.
Yeah.
What's the minimum age to use any social media platform?
Yeah.
It's 13.
Yeah.
Right? But doesn't matter. We just click the button. And then the problem is, again, onus is now on somebody to report somebody for being under the age, right? Snapchat's verification for that, directly asking the safety team, how are you combating youth under the age of 13 using their app? And their answer is, once we know somebody's under the age and it's confirmed, then we'll remove their account.
Yeah.
Well, it's like how?
Once then.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually, that's a good point, because I think that's one of those things that can de-glamorize these platforms for kids as well, is like doing that deep dive of like, who started it? Why did they start it?
Yeah.
They're making money out of it. What's the intention? I know, like with OnlyFans, because so many high schoolers know about it. Like, just,
right.
They all do.
Yeah.
Actually, there's some elementary school kids that knew about it, and that's we didn't even talk about. There were actually some moments where kids would come up and say, like, "Are you going to talk about OnlyFans?" Like, no, you're too.
Yeah. What? No.
Talk to your parent about that one. But like even with OnlyFans, like it's so glamorized. But what we would do to start off with was actually educate the kids on like who founded it. And what was that person doing and what was their intention? And I think that gets you thinking a little bit more about like, what are you feeding into when you're using these platforms?
What sort of persona are you interacting with when you're using that app? Like, who are the people who are using this app? Who do you think?
Yeah.
And that's a huge, element that goes into that. So the education for youth, education for, other businesses, and providing the prevention project is huge. What else are you working on?
Parent series. So we're planning on releasing some kind of a parent series that is not just presentations. We want it to actually be more interactive and live with the parents. So we're currently working on that right now. And then, as I said, like with Ally, we are finalizing the facilitator guides for the prevention project. And then hopefully doing something actually geared at parents as well. That's the next step.
Nice.
So that's really, and I, as a parent myself and having the TikTok presence that I do, that's something that I've noticed is there really is a desire to learn, but we also have to find different ways to, like you're saying, get the people that aren't naturally like involved in this space or, know about this space already.
Totally. And I think one of the questions that always gets brought up, again, I go back to the parent group, is the monitoring apps. What are your thoughts on those?
Okay, so I think they're great, but they are not to be used alone. And I think that's the problem with it, is that either parents are using it secretively, and then there's not that open conversation and trust between them and their kids, or they're just using it as a way to like make sure that their kids are safe, but that's not, use it. I think it's it's like the training wheels almost to giving full on access. But at the same time, you still have to be making sure that you're having conversations, you're educating your kid, because at the end of the day, even if you were living under a rock and you just had no technology in your home, if your kid goes to school or has friends, at some point they're going to have access to online without your parent guards, right? Yeah. So use it, but be intentional about how you use it.
Tough thing I also see too is parents wanting to implement it and use it only after their kids have had social media for a number of years now.
Yes. And we've actually, I'm sure you've seen that on that parent group, is like, oh, I just realized my child is doing X, Y, and Z. Like, how do I get on top of this?
Yes.
Or even, and I think this is one of those things too, like those the parent tools are mostly used by people that are getting smartphones for their kids, without having gotten their kids, used to like a device that isn't full on access to the internet, because a smartphone's not a phone. Yeah. It's more than that.
Oh yeah.
And even like tracking, I just did a TikTok video on this because somebody had posted in a parent group, like, I got my 8-year-old child an iPhone because I want to make sure that I can keep in touch with them and I know where they are in case they ever get lost. Well, it's like, so you don't want to expose your child to a few strangers, but in doing so, you're actually exposing them to like billions.
Yeah.
billions.
Yeah.
You can use like an AirTag.
Yeah.
Like I have those like AirTag watches for my daughter. When we go into like a really busy area, I'm not going to give her like this device that is so connected with every person out there.
Why do you think that changed? That all of a sudden switch of they need to have a phone so I can be connected to them all the time. Whereas where a lot of us were growing up, when the street lights came on, that was time to go home.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a good question. I think that tech has just it advanced so quickly. It became a part of our society and our culture and everything that we do so quickly. And we didn't have time to catch up with really being trained on it. This idea of like when we would go out as kids, how much conversation was to be had about like who you talk to, who you don't talk to, what time you come home. Like there were so many guidelines, but it felt tangible, right? At some point you're going to come back home and your parents have you and you're safe. And there's this now like overwhelming idea of like, well, this internet, it's now accessible at all times, even when you're at home, you're not fully safe anymore. And then I think a lot of people just don't know where to start in terms of conversation. So they just almost don't. And they go like, my child is a good child and they come from a loving home and therefore like they're safe.
And they'll know better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. Cause it is. And like that race to push out social media, we didn't think about, we knew what was promised with social media, the communication, the amount of, knowledge about global impacts that are happening and, jobs and all these things that were promised that happened, but we didn't think about what are some of the consequences from that. And we're still playing catch up. And where it gets even scarier right now is with the impact and what's going on with AI.
Oh yes. We're so behind.
Right.
I mean, we're in what you're saying, like we're trying to play catch up. And then there's a lot of people, like I've seen this in parent groups that I'm a part of. So many people that go, oh, like AI, I almost like don't understand it. It's so crazy. I'm just gonna shut out.
Yeah.
I think again, like it just.
I understand the burying your head in the sand.
Yeah.
I get it. Like but it's like, show me a company that has not decided to put some sort of AI chatbot on their website or integrate some sort of AI feature into their platform, and while it's still evolving and changing and getting better.
Yeah.
So what in this field where it's getting really scary is that I saw there's a company that's coming out, but I'm sure people can already do this anyway, but uses an AI chatbot to act as like your persona when you're dating online. Like it just tells you, here's what to say to this person next.
Oh,
yeah.
That can go very wrong.
Which is so terrible because if you're a very boring person and you have this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, talk about being catfish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what a company is wanting to do.
Wow.
And that's just with text generation, not even to do with image generation. And one of the things I actually saw recently is that there was I don't know if he was a doctor or teacher or somebody with, a prestigious title, arrested and charged for having a lot of child pornography, child sexual abuse material, but generated with AI.
Yeah.
Which the FBI even still had to give a PSA to be like, hey, still illegal.
Yeah.
Still illegal, which I'm glad that happened.
Yeah.
But you saw before how easy it was to create an image of a kid holding a firearm.
Oh, yes.
And that's with a easy to access, relatively inexpensive platform that's accessible through Discord.
Yeah.
There are other avenues in which these image generators can be downloaded and used without those parameters.
Yeah.
And it paints a very scary picture as to what we see kind of in the future for this.
Especially if we're not talking to our younger ones about like the ethics behind it. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest things too. Like you have to also translate your values and your ethics into the things that your kids are exposed to. Even if you don't understand it, at the very least, like ask your kid about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe you don't understand AI or you don't know what Discord is, but like if your kid is on there, you have to have those conversations.
Yeah, you have to have, and I think what's important too is that you have a foundational understanding of it before you go and ask.
Yes.
Because they might like skirt around the topic and be like, oh yeah, it's kind of happened, but it doesn't happen to me. Or like, that's not a feature that's, you know, that's not on there. That's on other apps. That's not on here. So having that and arming, you know, yourself with that knowledge beforehand you're having a conversation is huge. One of the things that we previously talked about in one of our last episodes was these like cults that are being produced through places like VR worlds and VR chats, and how easily that, again, that exploitation can happen. It starts with, you know, it's that same pathway, right? Yeah. But again, it's in a VR world. So if you're not casting that directly to the TV in the living room, like there's no way to monitor what's happening in that VR visor.
That's so true. Yes. And that's where you rely on. I'm sure that you've noticed this too when you've given presentations, but it's very easy to see the kids that are resilient to exploitation, digitally especially, and the kids that are not. And what I've noticed, like from those kids, especially in elementary school, because you can see it a little bit more, are the kids that are like, yo, my parents, like, my mom's talked about to me about this, or like my dad's talked to me about this, or my dad's a cop and he explains the story all the time. And so again, it's like, and I get it as a mother, it's going to be so hard to control keeping my child safe. Especially with the digital space. It just is. But knowing that she is loved and raised in a good family is not going to be enough.
Right.
And so that I have to make that intentional effort of, even though it feels overwhelming and intangible, have conversations around the digital space and what is unhealthy behavior. What does that look like online? And also, like, and this comes back to consent, how do you say no? How do you say no in different circumstances, right? How do you say no to somebody that is a friend and you don't want to hurt their feelings? How do you say no when you're feeling awkward? So like having that conversation as well of how do you get out of a situation, and giving multiple exit plans, not just one, is really important too.
That's huge. Absolutely. That's awesome. So all of the initiatives that you have, the Exploitation Education Institute, the Prevention Project, the parent program that you're putting together. What other? I don't like. I want to just ask. Like, do you even sleep?
No, no, I do not. Yeah, it's interesting because to me, like, this work is. Like I feel it's my life. It very much feels that way. It's very connected to like my sense of purpose. But it's definitely, it is a very fine balance of making sure that I have a certain amount of hours that I go and I go hard, and then completely shut off time for my child. So I have a wonderful like village of people around me that are also very supportive and helpful. But yeah, it's been busy.
Absolutely. But I'm curious, you know, with everything that you're putting together, what are kind of the future goals, or what do you want to see in the future, whether it be in schools, whether it be through governments or law enforcement? Like, what is that? What are some of those things you want to see?
Such a good question. Mandated education. That's first and foremost, because right now it's every school district, every province has their own separate requirements for what they teach to kids, what their curriculum looks like, and the same with law enforcement as well. I would love to see government implement, like, just all airport personnel, all hotel personnel, everybody, you know, all school districts having like just being in unison of what they're required to teach. We've this year, just actually in the last 2 weeks, finished creating online virtual courses as curriculum for teachers and educators. And I think one thing that I would love to see, and we're going to work on this next year, is making sure that we implement it as many schools as possible. And with the prevention project, the aim is really like every child in Canada has access to this and at least watches one module. So yeah, getting the resources out there and really focusing on, especially the consulting with any kind of internet safety committee, and also like the ministries of education, and even platforms as well. Actually, I'm doing a TikTok media event in a few days. in a few days
Yeah.
from now, because they have like an internet safety team, and just being able
wonderful.
to being able to collaborate and consult, with anybody and everybody essentially.
That's awesome. Well, if anybody wanted to find you online, what's the best way to find and locate the Exploitation Education Institute?
So the website is exploitationeducation.org. So you can go on there, you can see all the things that we're doing, including the prevention project and our online courses, and then you can easily get in touch with us. And that's really the best place to go.
Awesome. All right. Well, Tiana, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. And I hope folks listening at home are able to pick up at least a couple good strategies, things that you can start to work on and implement like right now, right? That's the most important part, is learning and then putting it into place. So Tiana, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Colton.
Awesome. Thank you for watching today's episode. For more information or to reach out to Tiana, her website is exploitationeducation.org. As well, please feel free to visit the preventionproject.ca for more information about those who are becoming victims of exploitation, or how to support and what are some of those signs, a little bit more in depth of what we talked about here today. So I hope you learned some good information. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you next time.